While I was having dinner at my son's house, my neighbor called me, his voice shaking. "Are you home?" he asked. "No," I said, "I'm having dinner at my son's place." There was a long pause before he whispered, then, "Who's in your house right now?" My son started laughing, but I didn't. My heart shattered the moment I realized my own son, the boy I'd poured my entire life into, wasn't just hiding a dark secret, he was actively plotting to betray me. And the twist. He thought he had me trapped, totally unaware of the silent guardian angel watching over my home. The kitchen door didn't just open, it slammed against the wall with a crack that made me jump, spilling hot coffee down my hand. Gary burst in, his old leather jacket scraping the doorframe as he stumbled. His eyes, bloodshot and darting like a cornered animal, met mine briefly before his trembling hands fumbled with his zipper. "Dad," he gasped, the words tumbling out before he could even catch his breath, "I need money. 25,000. Tonight." I set my half-empty mug down, right next to the scattered mail on the table. My hands were steady, but inside, a familiar knot tightened. The evening light, streaming through the window, cast long shadows across his disheveled face. His shirt was wrinkled, untucked, and those dark circles under his eyes. They hadn't been there last month. 25,000, I repeated, crossing my arms over my chest, the weight of disappointment settling deep in my gut. "What kind of trouble are you in now, son?" Gary started pacing, his boots clicking an erratic rhythm on the hardwood. He couldn't sit still. Couldn't even look me in the eye. His fist cracked against the table, making the salt shaker jump. "It's complicated, okay? Some business deal went wrong, and I need to make it right." "Business deal," I said, keeping my voice level, though my jaw was clenched tight. "Or gambling debt." His face flushed red. He spun to face me, blocking the kitchen entrance with his broad shoulders. "It's not your business what it is. I just need the money, and I know you have it from selling the farm." The farm. 3 generations of sweat and blood, sold just last year for my retirement. That money was supposed to last me through whatever years I had left, not disappear into some casino's coffers because my 38-year-old son couldn't control himself. "Gary," I moved closer, noticing his hands shaking when he thought I wasn't looking. "How much do you owe them?" "Them?" His voice cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about. The people who have you this scared. The ones who sent you here at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, looking like you haven't slept in a week." He ran his fingers through his greasy hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "Dad, please. You don't understand. These aren't the kind of people who wait around for payment plans." I'd heard variations of this speech before. Last year, it was 12,000 for a sure thing at the track. The year before, 8,000 for poker debts. Each time, Gary promised it would be the last. He'd learned his lesson. He was done with gambling forever. "No, son." I straightened my shoulders, looking him directly in the eye. "Not this time." His face went white, then red again. "What do you mean, not this time?" "I mean, no. Which is exactly why I'm saying no." I walked to the sink, turning my back on him deliberately. "Every dollar I give you disappears into some slot machine or poker game. I won't enable this anymore." "Enable?" The word exploded from his lips like a curse. "I'm asking my father for help, and you call it enabling." "I call it what it is." I turned around, gripping the edge of the counter. "You're 38 years old, Gary. When are you going to stop running to Daddy every time you make a mess of your life?" He stared at me for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Then something cold crept into his expression. Something I'd never seen before. "You'll regret this, old man." His voice was barely a whisper, but the menace in it made my blood run cold. "You think you're so high and mighty, sitting on all that farm money while your own son is in trouble? Well, maybe it's time someone taught you what real trouble looks like." Before I could respond, he turned and stalked toward the door, his boots heavy. The screen door banged shut behind him, and through the window, I watched him climb into his battered pickup. The engine roared to life with a sound that rattled the kitchen windows. I stood in the doorway, watching his taillights disappear down the gravel road. The sudden silence felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of cicadas and the settling sounds of the old house. I spent the weekend avoiding that kitchen, keeping busy with yard work and repairs. But every time I walked past that doorway, I could still hear his voice. "You'll regret this, old man." The threat echoed in my mind. I raked leaves, checked the fence line twice, trying not to think about the cold look in my son's eyes. Monday morning, I was in my armchair, nursing a cold coffee. The old rotary phone rang at exactly 10:15, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. "Hello? Dad?" Gary's voice. Different. Warmer. Almost cheerful. The harsh edge from Friday night was gone, replaced by something that reminded me of the boy he used to be. "Hey, I wanted to call and apologize for the other night. I was way out of line." I paused, raising my eyebrows at no one. In 38 years, Gary had never called to apologize for anything without being prompted. My grip on the receiver tightened. "Really? This is unexpected." I know. He laughed, but it sounded forced, like he was reading from a script. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. And you're absolutely right. I can't keep coming to you every time I mess up. It's not fair to you." I glanced at the family photos on the mantel, Gary as a child, back when his biggest worry was catching enough fireflies. Those days felt a lifetime ago. "We've been through this many times, son. This time will be different. I promise." His enthusiasm was almost convincing. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Eddie and I want to have you over for dinner Wednesday night. She's making that pot roast you like, with the little potatoes. We thought it might be nice to spend some time together as a family." Eddie's pot roast was indeed excellent, and I found myself considering the offer despite my better judgment. Maybe his wife's influence was finally starting to show. She'd always been the steadier one, the voice of reason. Wednesday night. I reached for a pen. "What time?" 6:30. "We're at 142 Maple Street now. We moved last month. Remember, I told you about the new place." He hadn't, but I didn't correct him. "It's the blue house with the white shutters, right across from the elementary school." I wrote it down, noting how quickly he rattled off the details. Most people pause. Gary spoke like he was reading. "Eddie's really excited about having you over," he continued. "She keeps talking about how we need to be a real family again. You know how she is about family dinners and traditions." That much was true. "Well," I said slowly, staring at the address, "I suppose I could come by." "Great. That's just great, Dad. We'll see you Wednesday at 6:30. And Dad, thanks for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, listening to the dial tone, staring at the napkin. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed. But then again, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe he'd finally realized he needed to put real effort in. Maybe Eddie had convinced him. I hung up, the paper feeling light, but the decision pressed down like a stone. The evening news droned. Gary's invitation weighed on me like an anchor. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the napkin, to 142 Maple Street. Even after turning off the TV and checking the locks, those numbers followed me. By 10, I was in bed, fully dressed except for my shoes, staring at the ceiling. The clock glowed green. 10:47, then 11:23, then 11:58. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gary's face from Friday night. Not the apologetic voice, but the cold stranger who'd threatened me. The son I'd raised wouldn't have looked at me that way. But then again, the son I'd raised wouldn't have needed $25,000 from loan sharks either. I thought about the last time he called from a casino. 2 in the morning, words slurred. "Dad, I need a ride home. My truck won't start." I'd found him stumbling, wallet empty, pride nowhere to be found. He'd slept in my passenger seat, snoring like the little boy who fell asleep on car trips to grandma's. The boy who'd spent summers in my garage, handing me tools. The teenager who'd shown me his first paycheck. The young man who'd promised to make something of himself. When had that boy disappeared? When had gambling become more important than family, more important than self-respect? I got up, walked to the window, looking at the street where Gary's truck had peeled out. Empty now. Lit only by the streetlight. Somewhere out there, my son was planning something. I could feel it in my bones, the way I used to sense storms coming across the farmland. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe today's phone call was genuine. Maybe Eddie had convinced him. She was a good woman, steady and practical. If anyone could straighten him out, it would be her. I returned to bed, picking up the framed photo from my nightstand. Gary at 12, gap-toothed, next to the go-kart we built. Hands dirty, eyes sparkling with joy. That boy believed anything was possible if you worked hard. Maybe some part of that boy still existed. Maybe Wednesday night's dinner would be the first step to finding him again. The clock read 12:34 when my eyelids finally grew heavy. I clutched the photo, drifting towards sleep, though an uncomfortable feeling I couldn't quite name gnawed at my consciousness. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. For now, I had to try to trust that my son still existed somewhere inside the desperate man who'd stood in my kitchen demanding money. Sometimes you have to try. Sometimes trust is all a father has left. Tuesday morning. I stood at the kitchen sink, coffee mug in hand, staring out the window. Sleep had been elusive. My mind cycled between hope and skepticism. Gary's voice had sounded so earnest, but 38 years had taught me to distinguish between genuine remorse and practiced performance. Then, I noticed it. An unfamiliar truck, parked across from Mrs. Henderson's mailbox, with a clear view of my driveway. Morning dew still clung to its windshield, suggesting it had been there overnight. I'd seen it yesterday, but assumed it was a visitor. Through the driver's side window, I made out a figure, hunched over the wheel, drumming his fingers nervously. Every few seconds, he'd glance up and down the street. I set my coffee down and walked outside, boots crunching on the gravel. The morning air was crisp. As I approached, I saw him more clearly, middle-aged, thinning hair, a pale complexion. I knocked gently. He jumped, rolled down the window. His eyes were bloodshot. "Morning," I said, trying to be neighborly. "Everything okay? Noticed you've been parked here." "Oh, yes, sir. Everything's fine." His voice was pitched too high. He avoided eye contact. "Just having some engine trouble, waiting for it to cool down." I glanced at the Virginia license plates. Odd for car trouble in Pennsylvania. Engine trouble. I've got some mechanical experience if you need a hand. Spent 40 years on everything from farm equipment to pickup trucks. No, that's very kind of you, but I think it's more of an electrical issue. Or maybe the carburetor." He fumbled, contradicting himself. "I've got a buddy coming to take a look." The tools in the truck bed suggested he might know about cars, but his nervousness told a different story. His knuckles were white gripping the steering wheel. "Well, if you change your mind, I'm right across the street. Name's Wilbur Porter." I gestured to my house. His eyes followed with intense interest. "There's a good mechanic shop about 2 miles down Route 15 if your buddy can't make it." "That's real generous of you, Mr. Porter." "Real generous." He seemed eager to end our conversation, already reaching for the window crank. "I'm sure we'll get it sorted out." "All right then." I stepped back, but something felt wrong. His explanation was too detailed, his nervousness disproportionate. "You take care now." Walking back, I looked over my shoulder. He'd rolled up his window, drumming his fingers again, occasionally glancing at my property with calculated interest. I finished my coffee, watching the truck, trying to shake the feeling I'd just been lied to. The license plate number stuck in my mind, JKL 407209. By noon, the truck was gone. Wednesday arrived with a spring warmth that made everything seem possible. I'd spent the day alternating between anticipation and apprehension. Gary's dinner invitation had consumed my thoughts. Despite my reservations, I found myself genuinely hoping this might be the beginning of something better. At 5:30, I started getting ready. My navy blue suit, worn but dignified. Polished shoes. A conservative tie. I checked my wallet. From the basement, I chose a Cabernet for a special occasion. The mirror reflected a man trying to look his best for his son. It pleased and saddened me. How long had it been since we'd shared a meal without tension? How many years since Gary invited me anywhere without needing something? Stepping outside at 6, I nearly collided with Elmer Jenkins, watering his flowers. His weathered face broke into a smile. "Well, now, don't you look sharp, Wilbur." "Special occasion. Gary invited me to dinner." I held up the wine bottle, feigning casual confidence. "First time in a while." Elmer's expression softened. "That's wonderful news. Family is the most important thing, especially at our age. Glad to hear you two are working things out. We'll see how it goes." I appreciated his optimism. "You know how these things can be." "I do indeed." He turned off his hose. "But sometimes all it takes is someone extending a hand first." Sounds like Gary's trying to do that. The drive to Gary's took me through familiar streets, across the bridge. Tonight, they felt different, like I was traveling towards something significant. His new address led me to a subdivision I rarely visited, with newer houses and manicured lawns. A level of prosperity that surprised me, given Gary's recent troubles. How was he affording a place like this? 142 Maple Street was blue with white shutters, just as he'd said. The lawn was neat, warm light glowed from the windows. A picture of domestic contentment. I parked behind a silver sedan, presumably Eddie's. I checked my appearance in the rearview. The wine bottle felt heavier as I walked up the path. Through the picture window, I saw movement. The porch light came on as I approached. Gary must have been watching. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the doorbell. This was it. The door opened before the bell finished chiming. Gary's smile was so wide it looked painful, stretching across his face. Before I could fully step onto the porch, he pulled the door open and grabbed my hand with both of his. "Dad. You made it. Right on time, just like always." His voice, that artificial cheerfulness, was pitched slightly higher than normal. Come in, come in. Eddie's been cooking all afternoon." Eddie appeared, almost instantly. Her hands fluttered nervously as she reached for the wine bottle. They trembled slightly when she took it. "Mr. Porter, it's so good to see you. This is such a beautiful wine. You really didn't need to bring anything, but it's so thoughtful." The words tumbled out breathlessly. She clutched the bottle against her chest like a shield. The interior of the house struck me as overly prepared. Every surface gleamed. I smelled furniture polish mixed with cooking aromas. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase on the coffee table, expensive-looking roses that seemed out of place. "Let me take your jacket, Dad." Gary was already behind me, helping me out of my suit coat. "You look great. Really sharp. That tie brings out your eyes." The dining room had been transformed into something from a magazine. China plates I'd never seen were arranged with mathematical precision, flanked by silverware that caught the candlelight from multiple candles. It was beautiful, but it felt like a stage set. "Gary tells me you haven't seen the house since we moved in," Eddie said, leading me toward the dining area. "We've done so much work on it. Gary's been incredibly handy." I followed her, noticing how she avoided direct eye contact. Her movements were quick, efficient, but there was an underlying tension in her shoulders, as if bracing herself. The meal was impressive. Perfectly prepared steak, creamy mashed potatoes, crisp green beans. Everything on those unfamiliar china plates. Gary made a show of opening my wine with a corkscrew that looked new, specifically for this occasion. "A toast," Gary announced, raising his glass with a theatrical flourish. "To second chances. And family. To putting the past behind us and moving forward together." The wine was good, but I found myself studying my son's face. His eyes kept darting to his watch. Quick glances he probably thought I wouldn't notice. Each time he checked, his smile tightened slightly. "Tell me about your work, Gary." I cut into my steak, cooked exactly as I liked it. "Things going better?" "Much better, Dad. Much better." He launched into a vague description of consulting work and new opportunities. It sounded rehearsed, completely lacking specifics. I've really turned things around. Eddie can tell you. I'm a different person now. Eddie nodded enthusiastically, but her smile was strained. He's been working so hard, really dedicated to making positive changes. Her hands were busy, constantly serving, refilling water, adjusting napkins. The conversation felt choreographed, both Gary and Eddie steering away from uncomfortable topics. When I asked about finances or specific employment, the answers became evasive, full of generalities and quick subject changes. Remember when you taught me to change the oil in that old Buick? Gary's laugh sounded forced as he launched into a carefully selected childhood memory. I must have spilled more oil on the garage floor than actually made it into the engine. These shared recollections felt different from natural reminiscing, too polished, too deliberately chosen to present Gary in the most favorable light. It was as if he'd prepared a mental list of safe, positive memories. Throughout the meal, I became increasingly aware I was watching a performance. My phone rang as we were finishing the main course. Its shrill tone cut through Gary's story about potential business expansion. Both Gary and Eddie froze for a fraction of a second. Gary's expression shifted to forced casualness. Go ahead and answer it, Dad. Don't mind us. But as I reached for the phone, I caught something in Gary's eyes, a flash of genuine panic he couldn't quite hide behind his practiced smile. My phone's sharp ring sliced through the dinner conversation like a blade through silk. Gary's fork paused midway to his mouth. Eddie's hands froze, reaching for the wine bottle. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the continued ringing that seemed louder with each pulse. Sorry, let me just check who this is. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the vibration. The caller ID showed Elmer Jenkins. A small surge of warmth. Go ahead and answer it, Dad. Don't mind us. Gary's voice had that artificial cheerfulness, but I caught a tightness underneath. Elmer, what can I do for you? I stepped slightly away, phone pressed to my ear, trying to maintain dinner etiquette while Gary and Eddie watched with expressions too carefully composed. Wilbur, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Elmer's familiar, gravelly voice came through clearly, tinged with concern. I was just wondering, are you home tonight? I thought I saw your car in the driveway earlier, but now I'm not so sure. No, I'm actually at Gary's place for dinner. Why? Is everything okay? The words felt strange in my mouth. Gary gripped his wine glass tighter. Elmer's voice carried a note of alarm that made my stomach clench. Wilbur, there are lights moving around inside your house. Not normal lights. Flashlight beams, like someone searching through rooms. I've been watching for about 10 minutes now. The fork slipped from Gary's fingers, clattering against his plate with a sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet dining room. Eddie's face had gone pale, and she was clutching the wine bottle like an anchor. What do you mean, lights moving around? My voice sounded distant, as if someone else were speaking. Are you certain? Dead certain. I was out checking my mailbox when I noticed them. First in your living room, then the kitchen, now they're upstairs. Whoever it is, they're being systematic about it. Should I call the police? The room seemed to tilt. My free hand instinctively reached for my car keys. Yes. Call the police. I'm coming home right now. Be careful, Wilbur. I don't know if they're still inside. I'll keep watching from my window until you get there. I ended the call, looking up to find Gary and Eddie staring at me. Gary's mouth hung slightly open. Eddie was still holding dishes, frozen like a statue. Someone's in my house, I announced, already moving toward my jacket. I need to get home right now. Gary's response came too quickly, his laughter pitched too high for the small dining room. Oh, come on, Dad. Old Elmer's probably just seen tree shadows or something. You know how he gets. Always thinking he's still on guard duty from his army days. The dismissive tone struck me wrong, especially after Elmer's worried call. I paused, putting on my jacket, studying Gary's face in the flickering candlelight. His smile looked strained, and there was something desperate in his eyes. Elmer's not confused, Gary. He knows the difference between shadows and flashlight beams moving through a house. I pulled my jacket on fully, checking my keys. Someone's robbing my home while I'm sitting here eating dinner. Dad, please. Eddie's voice was barely a whisper, her hands trembling as she set down the dishes. Maybe there's some explanation. But I was already moving toward the front door, my mind racing. The timing felt wrong, too convenient. But I pushed that thought aside. Gary rose from his chair so quickly it nearly toppled backward. His face shifted from fake concern to something that looked almost like panic. His movement to block my path was swift but clumsy, his desperation finally breaking through the careful facade. His hands came up in what might have been meant as a casual gesture, but his body language screamed panic. Whoa, hold on there, Dad. You're getting all worked up over nothing. His laughter rang false, an edge of hysteria. Elmer's 72 years old. The man probably can't see his own hand in front of his face at night. I stopped moving toward the door, not because his words made sense, but because something in his tone reminded me of the boy who used to lie about broken windows and missing cookies. The same overeager explanations, the same desperate need to be believed despite obvious evidence. Gary, move aside. I kept my voice level, but firm. Elmer's eyesight is fine, and he's not the type to call about shadows. Someone is in my house. Look, okay, maybe he did see something. Gary repositioned himself, more squarely between me and the door. His hands were now openly placed on my shoulders, a gesture that felt more restraining than comforting. But think about it logically. If someone was really robbing houses, wouldn't they pick a time when people aren't having dinner? Wouldn't they case the place first to make sure nobody's around? The words hit me strangely, too specific and knowledgeable for someone trying to reassure a worried father. I looked up at my son's face and saw something I'd never seen before, the cold calculation of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was desperate to prevent me from discovering it. How do you know they didn't case the place? The question came out before I could stop it. Gary's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. I don't. That's what criminals do, right? They plan these things out. His grip on my shoulders tightened. I realized he was physically preventing me from moving forward. Dad, please, let's just finish dinner and then drive over together. I'll come with you to check everything out. Behind Gary, Eddie had gone completely still. A dish towel clutched in her white-knuckled hands. When our eyes met, she looked away immediately, but not before I caught the guilt written across her features as clearly as if she'd confessed aloud. Get out of my way, son. The words came out harder than I'd intended, carrying decades of parental authority that Gary had always responded to as a child. I'm going to check on my house now. Dad, you're being unreasonable. Think about this rationally. Rationally? I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. Rationally would be trusting my neighbor's word over the protests of a son who's lied to me more times than I can count. Gary's face flushed red. For a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he moved even more directly into my path, using his size advantage to create a wall between me and the exit. You're not going anywhere until we talk this through properly. His voice had dropped to a tone I'd never heard from him before, cold, threatening, nothing like the desperate boy who'd sat in my kitchen 5 days ago begging for money. Gary William Porter. I used his full name, the way I had when he'd crossed a line that demanded immediate correction. You will step aside and let me leave this house right now. Or what? You'll call the cops on your own son. He was breathing heavily. I could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with something that might have been fear. You'll destroy our family over some old man's paranoid fantasies. But even as he spoke, I saw his eyes dart to the front door, then to his watch, then to Eddie. The pattern was too specific to be casual anxiety. He was tracking time, measuring it against something else, something that required me to stay exactly where I was for a predetermined period. It's not paranoid if someone's actually in my house, Gary. I took a step forward, testing his resolve. And if you don't let me pass, I'm going to start wondering why my own son is so determined to keep me away from home on the exact night someone decides to rob it. The accusation hung in the air between us like poison gas. I watched my son's face go through a series of micro-expressions, shock, guilt, anger, and finally, a desperate sort of resignation that told me everything I needed to know. Gary's hand shot forward and twisted the deadbolt with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. The sound seemed to hang in the air, final and unmistakable. He pocketed the key with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're not leaving, Dad. Not until we figure this out." The simple statement carried more menace than any threat. I stared at my son, the stranger wearing Gary's face, and felt something cold settle in my chest. The boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone capable of locking his own father in a house while accomplices ransacked the family home. "Gary," my voice was steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Unlock that door right now." "I can't do that." He leaned back against the door, arms crossed, no longer bothering to maintain even the pretense of concern. "Not until you calm down and listen to reason." Behind him, Eddie had pressed herself against the dining room wall, the dish towel still clutched in her hands. Her face showed the kind of horror that comes from watching someone you thought you knew transform into someone unrecognizable. "Listen to reason." I kept my voice calm. "Son, you just locked me in your house against my will while someone robs mine. What possible reason could justify that? You don't understand the situation you're in." Gary's tone carried a warning that made my skin crawl. "There are people involved in this that you don't want to cross. People who don't forgive debts or accept excuses." The admission hit me like a physical blow. Not just that Gary had planned this, but that he was willing to sacrifice his own father to solve problems he'd created through his gambling addiction. I thought about the $25,000 he demanded, about the cold look in his eyes when I'd refused, about his promise that I'd regret my decision. "I need to use the bathroom," I said quietly. Gary's expression shifted to suspicion, but basic human decency, or perhaps the last remnants of his upbringing, prevented him from refusing. "Fine, but don't try anything stupid." The bathroom was at the back of the house. I knew from previous visits that it had a window facing the backyard. As I closed the door, I could hear Gary and Eddie talking in hushed, urgent voices. Their words were indistinct, but the tone was pure panic. The window was older than I'd remembered, with a simple latch that opened easily despite years of paint buildup. The screen came away with minimal noise. I found myself looking down at a drop of perhaps 6 feet into Eddie's flower bed. Not ideal for a 60-year-old man, but manageable if I was careful. Getting through required more flexibility than I'd possessed in years, but desperation provided both motivation and strength. I landed heavily in the soft earth, dirt staining my clothes, small branches catching at my jacket. The impact sent a shock through my knees, but nothing felt broken. Behind me, I could hear Gary's voice getting louder, more agitated. How long before he realized what had happened? How long before he discovered the open window? My car keys were still in my jacket pocket. The engine turned over smoothly. I backed out of the driveway with careful precision, not wanting to alert the neighbors. It wasn't until I was several blocks away that I allowed myself to fully process what had just occurred. My own son had betrayed me. Not just refused to help, not just lied or manipulated, but actively orchestrated a crime against me while pretending to offer reconciliation. The dinner, the apologies, Eddie's nervousness, all of it had been theater designed to keep me away from my house while it was being robbed. The drive back to my neighborhood passed in a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness that felt like grief for the son I thought I knew. But underneath all of that was something else. A cold determination that Gary had inherited from me, along with his mother's eyes and my stubborn streak. He'd made a mistake in letting me discover his plan. An even bigger mistake in underestimating what his old man was capable of when pushed too far. I'd spent 40 years working with my hands, solving problems, and dealing with difficult people. My son was about to learn that some lessons come too late to do any good. As I turned onto my street, I could see police lights flashing in the distance, red and blue reflections dancing off the windows. Elmer had kept his word. Now I needed to get home and find out exactly what my son and his accomplice had stolen from me. More importantly, I needed to decide what I was going to do about it. Red and blue lights painted my street. As I turned the corner, my heart sank. The police cars were clustered directly in front of my house. It looked like something from a TV drama. Multiple patrol vehicles, officers moving with purpose, neighbors gathered at respectful distances, their faces reflecting that morbid curiosity. I parked quickly behind the last police car and hurried toward my front door, where Officer Ted Miller was coordinating what appeared to be the tail end of an investigation. Through the rear window of one patrol car, I could see a slumped figure in handcuffs, head down in the universal posture of defeat. "Mr. Porter." Officer Miller approached me with professional calm. "I'm glad you're here. We've got your burglar in custody, and your neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, has been extremely helpful." Elmer was right. The words came out as relief rather than surprise. I looked toward Elmer's house and saw him standing by his fence, arms crossed, with the satisfied expression of a man whose instincts had been vindicated. Someone really was in my house. "Yes, sir, they were. We apprehended the suspect in your basement attempting to access what appears to be a safe. He's confessed to breaking and entering, and he's also provided some additional information that I think you'll find disturbing." Officer Miller guided me toward the patrol car where the burglar sat. Through the window, I saw him, a thin, pale man in his 40s. The same nervous individual I'd spoken to yesterday morning. His name is Otis Raines. Ring any bells? I spoke to him yesterday. He claimed to have car trouble. The memory felt surreal now, knowing I'd offered help to someone who was planning to rob me. He seemed nervous, but I thought he was just stressed about his truck. According to Mr. Raines, he was hired to commit this burglary. He's been very forthcoming, probably hoping for a reduced sentence. Officer Miller's expression grew more serious. "Mr. Porter, he claims your son, Gary, arranged this entire operation." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of me had been expecting them since I realized Gary was preventing me from leaving. Hearing it confirmed by law enforcement made it undeniably real. Gary hired him to rob my house while I was at dinner. The statement came out flat, emotionless, as my mind struggled to process the full extent of my son's betrayal. "That's what he's telling us. Says Gary promised him $5,000 to get into your safe and retrieve $25,000 in cash. When we arrested him, he immediately started talking about how Gary had set up the dinner invitation specifically to keep you away from the house during the burglary." I walked closer to the patrol car and looked directly at Otis Raines. When he finally raised his eyes, I saw shame and fear, but no real remorse. This was a man who'd been caught, not one who regretted his actions. "Did you get into the safe?" I asked Officer Miller, though I was still staring at the burglar. "No, sir. Your basement door was locked. By the time he got it open, Mr. Jenkins had already called us. He fled back upstairs when he heard our sirens, but we had the house surrounded. The safe shows tool marks where he attempted to force it, but it held secure. We walked down to my basement, where I saw the evidence of Otis's failed attempt. My old modular safe, installed by my father 40 years ago, stood intact despite obvious signs of tampering. Tools were scattered around it, a crowbar, screwdrivers, what looked like a small drill. Evidence of desperation, not professional expertise. "Everything appears to be undisturbed," Officer Miller said, making notes. "But we'll need you to check thoroughly once we've finished processing the scene." Back outside, Elmer approached with the measured stride of a man who'd been proven absolutely right. His handshake was firm, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "I told you that truck looked suspicious," he said, allowing himself a small smile. "Been watching that Raines character since Tuesday morning. Something about him just didn't sit right, too nervous, too interested in your house. You saved my life savings, Elmer. If you hadn't called when you did." I trailed off, not wanting to think about what $25,000 would have meant to my retirement. Any neighbor would have done the same thing. But his pride was evident and well-deserved. Officer Miller approached us again, his expression grave. "Mr. Porter, we're heading to your son's house now to place him under arrest. Given Mr. Raines' confession and the evidence we've gathered, we have enough for charges of conspiracy to commit burglary, among other things. I need to ask, do you want to press full charges against your son?" I looked back at my house, thinking about the violation of trust, the elaborate deception, the cold calculation required to rob your own father. Then I looked at Elmer, who'd risked his own safety to protect me. Yes, the word came out hard and final. I want full charges pressed against Gary Porter, and against anyone else involved in this conspiracy. The drive to Gary's neighborhood felt different this time. Not the hopeful journey of a father seeking reconciliation, but the grim procession of justice. I followed the police convoy at a respectful distance, watching the red and blue lights reflect off house windows. Gary's house was blazing with lights when we arrived. Every window illuminated. Through the large picture window, I could see frantic movement. Gary pacing like a caged animal, Eddie moving between rooms with what looked like suitcases. Officer Miller positioned his unit strategically, creating a perimeter. I parked across the street, close enough to witness justice. The front door opened before Officer Miller could knock. Eddie stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, looking like she'd been crying for hours. Behind her, Gary was visible, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate expression of a man whose careful plans had collapsed. "Mrs. Porter, we have a warrant for your husband's arrest." Officer Miller's voice carried easily across the quiet street. "Is Gary Porter inside?" "He's here." Eddie's voice was barely audible, but she stepped aside. "He's been expecting you." Gary appeared in the doorway, no longer the manipulative son who'd tried to charm me into compliance just hours earlier. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his hands shook visibly as Officer Miller began reading his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is ridiculous." Gary's voice cracked as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You're destroying a family over some old man's paranoid fantasies. My father doesn't know what he's talking about. Gary William Porter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary, solicitation of criminal activity, and conspiracy to commit theft." Officer Miller's tone remained professional despite Gary's protests. "Your accomplice has provided detailed testimony about your role in planning and financing this operation." "Accomplice? What accomplice? I don't know what you're talking about." But even as Gary denied everything, his eyes darted toward the patrol cars. I knew he was looking for Otis Raines, hoping against hope that his hired burglar hadn't betrayed him. Eddie stood in the doorway, watching her husband's arrest with an expression that combined horror and resignation. When Gary looked to her for support, she took a deliberate step backward, distancing herself, both physically and emotionally. "Eddie, tell them this is crazy. Tell them I was with you all evening." Gary's voice was rising to a desperate pitch. "You know I didn't do anything wrong. I know you locked your father in our house." Her voice was quiet, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I know you hired someone to rob him while you kept him away from home. I know you planned this whole thing because he wouldn't give you money for your gambling debts." The admission hung in the air like a confession in church. Final and damning. Gary's face went white, then red, then white again as he realized his own wife was refusing to provide him with an alibi. "You don't understand what you're doing." He struggled against the handcuffs as officers guided him toward the patrol car. "There are people involved in this that you can't protect me from. If I can't pay them back, then you should have thought of that before you tried to steal from your own father." Eddie interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Before you turned our marriage into part of your criminal schemes." As Gary was placed in the back of the patrol car, I could see him through the window, still talking desperately to anyone who would listen, still trying to manipulate his way out of consequences he brought entirely upon himself. But the door closed on his protests, and suddenly the street was quiet again, except for the radio chatter. Officer Miller approached my car as the convoy prepared to leave. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to finalize your statement, Mr. Porter, but the case is solid. Between Mr. Raines' confession and Mrs. Porter's charges." I nodded, watching the patrol car containing Gary disappear around the corner. 38 years of fatherhood, and it had come to this. My son handcuffed in the back of a police car, facing prison time for trying to rob his own father. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal as the police cars departed, porch lights dimming and curtains falling back into place. But for the Porter family, nothing would ever be normal again. 2 days had passed since the arrests. Friday afternoon found me sitting on my front porch with Elmer, sharing a quiet beer and watching the neighborhood settle into its weekend rhythm. The media attention had faded, the police tape had been removed, and life in Riverside was returning to its comfortable predictability. "Court called this morning," I told Elmer, taking a sip from my can. Gary got 5 years probation, full restitution, and 500 hours of community service. Judge said the family nature of the crime was an aggravating factor, not a mitigating one. Elmer nodded approvingly. Sounds about right. What about the other fellow? Raines? 2 years in county prison. Judge wasn't as lenient with him, being a repeat offender and all. I looked across the street, where the empty space in front of Mrs. Henderson's house reminded me of where this whole drama had started. Funny thing is, I almost feel sorry for Gary. Almost. Almost counts for something, I suppose. Elmer set down his beer. Shows you're still his father, even after everything. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between friends who've been through something significant together. Elmer had become more than just a neighbor. I keep thinking about that Tuesday morning, Elmer said eventually. Something about that truck just bothered me, you know. Couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was like watching someone case a house in broad daylight. Your instincts were spot on. If you hadn't been paying attention, if you hadn't called when you did. I shook my head, not wanting to dwell on what might have happened. Those savings represent 40 years of work, Elmer. My entire retirement fund was in that safe. Well, it's still there, and that's what matters. He gestured toward my house. And now you know your home security is solid. That old safe of your father's proved its worth. I'd spent the previous day upgrading my security system, installing motion sensors, and improving the locks, not out of paranoia, but practical acknowledgement that trust, once broken, needed to be rebuilt with precautions. Heard from Eddie yesterday, I mentioned. She's filing for divorce. Said she can't be married to someone who'd victimize his own family for gambling money. Smart woman. She seemed like she was caught in the middle of something she never signed up for. Elmer's tone was sympathetic. Any word on whether Gary's getting help for his gambling problem? Court-mandated counseling as part of his probation. Whether it takes or not. I shrugged, trying to balance hope with realism. I suppose that's up to him now. I can't fix him, and I can't keep enabling him by bailing him out of trouble. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. For the first time in days, I felt truly relaxed. The crisis was over. Justice had been served. Life could move forward, not the same as before. Trust, once shattered, leaves permanent scars, but forward nonetheless. You know what the strangest part of all this was? I asked Elmer. That dinner on Wednesday night. Sitting there, watching Gary and Eddie perform like actors in a play, knowing something felt wrong, but not being able to identify what it was. Parental instincts, Elmer said simply. You raised that boy, so you know when he's being genuine and when he's putting on an act. The problem was, you wanted to believe he'd changed. Exactly. I wanted to believe it so badly that I ignored the evidence right in front of me. I finished my beer and set the empty can on the table. Won't make that mistake again. Doesn't mean you stop hoping, though. Just means you hope with your eyes open. As evening approached, neighbors emerged for weekend activities. Mrs. Henderson waved. The Johnson kids rode their bicycles, their laughter echoing. This was what Gary had tried to steal from me, I realized. Not just money, but the security that comes from knowing you can age in place, surrounded by people who care. Elmer's vigilance had protected more than just my savings, it had preserved the peace of mind that makes retirement possible. Thank you, I said to Elmer, the words carrying more weight than casual conversation. For watching out for me, for trusting your instincts, for being the kind of neighbor everyone deserves. Elmer smiled, his expression mixing pride with genuine affection. That's what neighbors do, Wilbur. We watch out for each other. He gestured toward the empty street where Otis's truck had once sat. Besides, it felt good to put those old army observation skills to use for something worthwhile. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden light that suggested peaceful endings and new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, on my own front porch, with a friend who'd proven himself when it mattered most, in a neighborhood that had shown its true character when tested. Justice had been served. Community had been preserved. And trust, though modified by experience, remained possible between people who earned it honestly.